Last winter, in January 2018, I lived in a secluded area on a small piece of property outside of Redmond, Oregon. The property was situated between two major highways, surrounded by a lot of farmland and open country. Despite the isolation, we had close neighbors. The area is known for its heavy snowfall during the winter months. My parents had gone on vacation, leaving me home alone for a week or so. One night, I decided to take some acid. I know it was not the best choice, especially when alone in such a remote location, but I was bored and didn't anticipate any issues. After a few hours, it had gotten pretty late. At this point, I decided to smoke some weed to help me fall asleep. I also have insomnia, so this wasn't out of the norm for me. That night, there was no snow on the ground yet. About 20 to 30 minutes after smoking my bowl and getting back into bed, which faced two large windows with open curtains overlooking my parents' property, I started to feel uneasy. I knew I was tripping, but I wasn't seeing things that weren't there. I couldn't sleep and was tossing and turning when I suddenly felt a terrible sense of danger. My heart started to race. I noticed something moving in my parents' yard on the forest's edge. My heart dropped and I froze, thinking someone had broken into the property and was walking around outside. I kept watching, too scared to move or look away. At first, it looked like a man with hooves instead of feet, which sounds ridiculous now. But the more my eyes adjusted, the scarier it got. I could see two dark horns on its head sticking straight up in the air, as well as huge wings spread wide across its back. They were so big that they nearly covered its entire body, even though they were completely spread out to the sides. He was crouching, but the wings were still large enough to go far above his head and far below his feet. I realized I was looking at what appeared to be a real-life demon, and I felt like I was about to throw up or pass out from fear. I just kept watching as it started to walk around the yard. At some point, I noticed he also had a tail. It was long and thin, coming to a point at the end. The worst part was that he appeared to be searching for something, and I feared that whatever he was looking for was me. The whole encounter probably lasted 20 to 30 minutes until I heard my parents' car pull into the driveway, which is located at the back of the property on a different road. As soon as I heard them get out of the car, I ran upstairs. My room was in the basement, to meet them at the door, crying because I was so scared. I have never felt such a dark and scary presence in my life. I won't take acid again and try to forget everything, but I'm still traumatized by what happened. This is 100% true, even though it sounds completely insane. In 2016, I was living in a small town in Oregon. It was the end of summer, and I was on my way to work. I worked at a restaurant in a nearby town. The road I took to work was a 2-lane highway that ran through the woods. There were no streetlights, so it was pitch black at night. The only light came from my headlights and the occasional car that passed me by. I had been driving for about 10 minutes when I saw something in the road ahead of me. I slowed down and tried to get a better look at it. It was a large, dark figure that was hunched over in the middle of the road. I couldn't make out any details, but it looked like it was covered in fur. I thought it might be a bear, but it didn't look like any bear I had ever seen before. As I got closer, the figure stood up on 2 legs and turned to face me. It was then that I realized that this was no bear. It was a Bigfoot. I slammed on my brakes and came to a stop about 20 feet away from it. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. The Bigfoot just stood there, staring at me. I could see its eyes reflecting in the headlights of my car. After what felt like an eternity, the Bigfoot turned and ran off into the woods. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Eventually, I got out of my car and walked over to where the Bigfoot had been standing. There were large footprints in the road, but they weren't human or bear tracks. They looked like a cross between a human and an ape's footprint. I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures of the prints. I got back into my car and continued on to work. When I arrived at the restaurant, I told my coworkers what had happened. They didn't believe me at first, but when they saw the pictures I had taken, they knew that I was telling the truth. After that night, I never saw the Bigfoot again, but I would hear strange noises coming from the woods around my house at night. It sounded like a mix between a human and an ape's scream. I moved away from that town about 6 months later, but I still think about that encounter to this day. I am from Washington State and have been here for 10 years. My parents moved us from the city to a small town called Eatonville, located at the base of Mount Rainier when I was 12. The house we bought is at the end of a long dirt road, leading up into some woods and eventually connecting with another road that takes you back down into town. Our property, which is surrounded by forest except for one side where there is an open field, followed by a small patch of wood leading to the road, spans 5 acres. It is mostly wooded except for a large clearing around our house where we keep our animals, including chickens, ducks, rabbits, and goats. We also have a barn full of horses. The first time I saw this creature was about 2 years ago, while I was out walking my dog at night. It was late, and although it was dark outside, some lights were still on inside the house. As we walked around the house, my dog suddenly stopped and started growling at something in the woods behind our property. I looked over and saw a huge black shape moving through the trees. It was about 7 feet tall with long arms that reached down past its knees, and it moved on 2 legs, just like a human. I couldn't see any features on its face due to the darkness, but I could tell it wasn't human. Terrified, I ran back inside, locking all the doors behind me. My parents were asleep, so I didn't tell them what happened, fearing they would think I was crazy. About a week later, my dad and I were in the woods, cutting down trees for firewood. After working for a few hours, we heard something moving in the bushes. We stopped and looked toward the noise, seeing the creature about 50 feet away, staring at us with huge yellow eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. I could now see its face clearly. It had a long snout, like a dog, but also human-like features such as a nose and mouth. It was covered in thick black fur, except for its chest, which was white, and its hands, which were more like paws. It stared at us for a few seconds before running off into the woods. I was terrified, but my dad seemed shocked and didn't mention it until we got home. I told him about my first encounter, and he believed me because of how scared I looked. He then shared that he had seen something similar while hunting in these woods about a year ago. He initially thought it was another hunter, but he realized it wasn't human because of its size and speed. Although he didn't get a good look at its face, he described it as having long arms and legs, thick black fur, and huge yellow eyes, just like what I saw. He explained that he hadn't told me about his encounter to avoid scaring me, but now that we both had seen the creature, there was no point in hiding it. We hadn't seen the creature again until today, when my dad went hunting for deer. He returned hours later, terrified and out of breath, pointing to his truck, which had huge claw marks on it. We then heard a loud growling noise and saw the creature in our driveway staring at us with those yellow eyes before running off into the woods. Terrified by the realization that this creature had been stalking us for years, I told my dad we needed to leave as soon as possible. However, he insisted we couldn't leave until we knew what the creature was capable of. He went outside with his gun to find it, but it was already gone. Although we haven't seen the creature in a while, I know it's still out there, and we need to be cautious. What are your thoughts on this? If you decide to read this to your audience, I would love to read their comments on what they think it could be. I was born and raised in the Sierra Nevada mountains of Northern California. When I was young, my father would tell me stories about things he had seen while hunting or fishing. Most of them were believable, but there were some that just didn't make any sense at all. One story he told me involved a creature that he said looked like a cross between an ape and a man. He said it was huge and covered with hair from head to toe, except for the face, which had very little hair on it. The thing stood up on two legs like a man, but it moved through the trees like an ape. It swung from branch to branch without touching the ground, until it got close enough to jump down onto his back, knocking him over. Then, it ran off into the forest as fast as lightning. At first, I thought my dad was making these stories up because they sounded too far-fetched. However, after hearing similar stories from other people who claim to have seen something similar around here for many years, I started believing him more than before. Even though we never saw anything ourselves when we went out looking for them together. It wasn't until one day, while walking home alone from school, that everything changed forever. Standing there, facing the opposite direction, was a tall, black, shapeless mass. It was almost featureless and seemed to move closer towards us ever so slowly. My thoughts became jumbled and confused. I felt disoriented. Suddenly, I felt a strong urge to look straight ahead. That's when I noticed another, smaller figure moving alongside the larger one. It was also dressed completely in black clothes, including a hood covering its entire body from top to bottom. Its hands and feet were not exposed, revealing no identity whatsoever. However, the odd thing to notice was that, unlike the others, it had no shoes. It was either barefoot or somehow able to walk on the ground comfortably without any problem or concern in the slightest. Slowly, I began noticing changes starting to appear. Features like eyes, mouth, nose, ears, teeth, and even bone structure became visible. It was a frighteningly real and horrific sight to behold. It was a vision I'll take to my grave for the rest of my life. It will haunt my dreams and nightmares, to say the least. But the absolute horror was something I never imagined possible before this experience. Words cannot describe the emotions I experienced at that time. However, I know I lived through it. Although, honestly, I am surprised considering the shock my brain must have gone through, protecting me from insanity. What I witnessed at that moment nearly drove me to the brink of it. Regardless of what was happening, I was quite aware and believe I eventually came to my senses. I managed to regain control of my actions by screaming and running away. As soon as I started taking a step, the world turned upside down, inside out, backwards, forwards, and sideways. Literally, everywhere and every way you can imagine. I don't think about it much anymore. Please understand that I've tried to explain this to the best of my ability, given the circumstances. It's impossible to adequately or accurately express the level of experience beyond description or comprehension. No logical explanation is imaginable. Therefore, I am asking you kindly to give me the benefit of the doubt. I am telling the truth and would be grateful for you reading, listening, and understanding my perspective and experiences. I truly hope it helps someone somewhere. I was born in 1980 and raised in the small town of Port Angeles, Washington. I am a Native American, Tlingit, on my mother's side and Filipino on my father's side. My parents were both very superstitious people. They believe that there are things out there that we can't see, but they could hurt us if we weren't careful. I grew up hearing stories about skinwalkers, wendigos, Bigfoot, and other creatures from them, as well as other family members. When I was young, I thought it was all just silly superstition, but when I got older, I realized that these stories may have been true. One day, when I was around 12 years old, my friends and I decided to go camping at Lake Crescent, which is located near Port Angeles. We found a nice spot by the lake where we set up our tents for the night. We spent most of the day swimming in the lake or hiking through the woods, looking for deer or rabbits to hunt with our slingshots. At one point, we were walking through the woods when we heard a strange noise coming from behind us. We turned around and saw what looked like a large man standing about 50 feet away from us. He was covered in hair and had long arms that almost reached the ground. We all stood there, staring at this thing for several seconds before it let out an ear-piercing scream. It sounded like nothing I've ever heard before or since. At that point, we all turned and ran as fast as we could back to our campsite. There, we grabbed our stuff and got into my friend's car. We drove home without stopping until we reached Port Angeles. When I told my parents what happened, they said that it must have been a wendigo, but I'm not so sure. I know some people may think this is just another Bigfoot story, but whatever this thing was, it wasn't human. I believe that there is more than meets the eye. I'm not sure what to think about things anymore. It's like everything I thought I knew is just a lie. I know this isn't the most horrific story in the world, but I still have to live with it every day. Thanks for taking the time to read this. I am a 23-year-old female, and I have had a few weird experiences with the paranormal and supernatural. The first one happened to me back in 2017. At that time, I was going through a hard period in my life and was feeling suicidal. I had started taking an antidepressant medication called Wellbutrin. It was my second day on the medication, and it made me feel much worse than before. I had a bottle of about 15 to 20 pills. When I got to the trailhead, it was about 10:30 at night. My plan was to walk down the trail, return to my car, and then go home. About 2 minutes into my walk, I was overcome with an overwhelming feeling of fear. It felt like something bad was going to happen. Then, I heard a stick break behind me. Turning around, I saw a huge wolf-like creature standing on all fours in the middle of the trail, about 20 feet in front of me. It had a dog-like head, but the face looked more human than that of a dog. The creature was in a weird, hunched-over position, breathing heavily and growling at me. Frozen in fear, I could not move or scream. Then, the creature stood up on two legs and walked into the woods. As it did, I could see how tall it was. It stood about 8 feet tall on two legs. Once it was out of sight, I sprinted back to my car and drove home. Upon arriving home, I took the rest of the pills in my bottle. About 10 minutes after taking the pills, I heard a voice in my head. It told me that if I didn't get to a hospital right away, I would die. That voice saved my life. If it hadn't told me to go to the hospital, I wouldn't be here today. After that incident, I stopped taking the medication, visited my psychiatrist, and got on a new one. My second experience happened in 2019. I was at my house alone when it occurred. It was around 2 in the morning when I heard someone banging on my front door as hard as they could. When I looked out of the window next to the door, there was no one there. The banging continued for about another minute before it suddenly stopped. I was too scared to go outside to check. The banging sounded like it was coming from inside my house. But the only way that could have happened is if someone had a key to my house and let themselves in. I called 911, and the police came out to check everything out, but they didn't find anything or anyone. I have had a few other experiences, but they were not as scary as the first two. I am very interested in the paranormal and supernatural, and I would like to know what that wolf-like creature was that I saw on the trail. Was it a werewolf or something else? In the late summer of 2007, my family and I were living in a small town on the coast of Northern California. We had just moved into our new house after being homeless for over a year. My parents both worked full-time jobs, so they were always gone during the day. One morning, while I was getting ready for school, I noticed something strange about our backyard. There were several large trees surrounding it. Now, they all seemed to be leaning towards one side, as if they had been pushed by some unseen force. The grass also looked like it had been trampled down recently. As soon as I stepped outside to take a closer look at what might have caused this damage, an overwhelming feeling of dread washed over me. Goosebumps covered my entire body from head to toe. At first glance, everything appeared normal, except for these few oddities which made no sense whatsoever. However, upon further inspection, something else caught my eye. Standing near one corner of our property line stood two massive creatures staring back at me with glowing red eyes. The beasts must have seen me looking because, when their gaze met mine, both let out deep growls. They ran off into the nearby woods, where we could still hear them howling long after we lost sight of them. I've never told anyone about this encounter until now. Most people would think that either I'm crazy or it's just another wild animal story. However, neither explanation seems plausible given how intelligent these beings appeared compared to any other known species on Earth today, including humans. I've seen these same creatures on two other occasions. The first time was in 2005 when I was hiking through the woods near my home. I came across a clearing where they were standing together, staring back at me with glowing red eyes before running off into nearby bushes. The second encounter happened just last year, in 2017, while walking along a dirt road that runs parallel to our property line. But this time, there were 3 of them instead of 2. They all looked exactly alike except for their size. One being slightly smaller than the others made it appear more like an adolescent rather than a full-grown adult male like its companions, who stood around 7 feet tall each. This is a very scary story, and I'm not sure what to make of it. The only thing that makes sense is that these creatures are some sort of unknown species or perhaps even extraterrestrial in nature. No known animal on Earth today exhibits this level of intelligence compared to any other creature, including humans. Just wanted to let you know, I appreciate you reading this and potentially putting this on your YouTube channel. You never know if someone hears this that would cause them to connect to it. You never know, maybe they will come forward with their own experiences that they were too shy to come forward with. Happy trails. So, I am from Minnesota and have been interested in the paranormal for a long time. One day, my mom was telling me about a camping trip she went on. They were just going through these old trails that led to their campsite. As they were walking down this trail, there was a very large log lying across it. When you looked up past it, you could see a black figure standing behind another tree, peeking around at them. She said that its head looked like an owl's because of how big and round it was. There seemed to be a lot of detail in the face, even though she couldn't see any features other than its eyes. The eyes appeared red, as if glowing. This could have been due to light reflecting off of them. It then dove back behind the tree once it realized that they had seen it. I didn't really think much of her story until recently. We moved out onto our 100-plus acre ranch here in Colorado near Loveland Pass. My family has only lived here for about 2 years now, but ever since moving into our house, we all feel extremely uneasy whenever we are outside after dark. This is especially true during certain times, such as sunsets or sunrises. It seems like those are the times when whatever makes us feel uneasy comes around. The first experience happened not too long after moving in. I would say probably within a 6-month time frame. We had just gotten done eating dinner, so everyone decided that they would go outside onto our front porch. Meanwhile, my dad started cleaning up everything inside, including doing the dishes, etc. Once he finished cleaning up, he came outside with us. He then proceeded to tell us what happened while he was inside doing dishes. He heard something move quickly right next door between 2 trees. This was followed by footsteps running away from where he believed the sound originated. Naturally, thinking someone must be messing around over there, he tried looking out the windows in that direction. However, nothing seemed unusual. We decided it was better to stay indoors for the rest of the evening, avoiding anything else happening. The second experience happened not too long ago, maybe 3 weeks prior to writing this email. The sun had already set, giving way to darkness throughout the entire property, although the sky remained clear and stars shone brightly overhead. This cast a faint glow on the ground below, allowing us to easily navigate our way back toward the house despite the lack of streetlights, etc. However, while walking across the yard, I noticed a shadowy figure following closely behind, seeming to mimic my movements and trying to keep pace without getting caught. Knowing if I managed to outrun whoever was following, I might lose track entirely, giving me a chance to escape completely. My heart began pounding in my chest, fear taking hold instantly. I realized it wasn't anyone familiar trying to play a prank. Instead, it was someone or something far worse. In that case, I ran faster, hoping to get inside safely and lock the doors immediately afterward. Peering cautiously through the window, I saw the same silhouette standing motionless halfway between the edge of the forest line and the closest side of the barns or sheds, dimly lit by the moonlight above. I wondered about its intentions, clearly visible even from the distance separating us. Remaining silent, neither of us spoke nor made any sudden movements. I decided to wait and watch, hoping it would reveal its identity soon enough. As the moment passed, the creature continued to stand perfectly still, waiting patiently. Perhaps it was waiting for the best opportunity to present itself without warning. Deciding to take a risk, I opened the door slightly and yelled, "What do you want?" Dead silence blanketed the surroundings entirely, except for the sounds of crickets chirping softly in the background. Otherwise, total quietness settled upon the world. There was no answer given in return, which made my stomach drop almost to the floor. My whole body shivered uncontrollably. The reply came slowly and methodically, a low growl sounding angry and annoyed, combined with a questioning tone. It said, "We are hungry." That was the simple response given. Whether it was attempting to scare us or leave us alone, I honestly couldn't tell the difference. Regardless, it somehow struck the wrong nerve, provoking a negative reaction. This resulted in me shouting profanities, ordering an immediate departure, and adding threats to call the police if necessary. I demanded the person stop harassing and trespassing on our property, as it is a private residence. This last encounter occurred less than a week ago, shortly before midnight. It was a Friday night, and my mom had just gone to bed after staying up late watching TV together. I decided it would be a good time to take our dog outside for a bathroom break. I grabbed the leash, hooked it onto the collar, and led the way toward the front door and porch. While standing beside it, I waited patiently, staring intently into the darkness beyond the steps below. I was unable to see anything clearly, making it difficult to distinguish shapes or movements taking place nearby. Something large was crouched down on the ground, barely visible unless specifically focused upon its location. What I saw firsthand resembled a human shape covered in fur instead of skin. Although it was hard to tell from the distance separating us, I could estimate it was maybe 10 feet away, though it seemed closer at the moment. Realizing I couldn't move, I was frozen in fear, unable even to blink my eyes, let alone turn my head to look anywhere else. However, I did manage to speak softly. Everything went quiet again seconds later, with footsteps moving quickly in the direction of the creature hiding behind the trees. Knowing I must act fast, I decided to run back inside to safety and lock the doors immediately afterward. The next morning, I told my family what had happened the night before. Everyone looked concerned and worried, saying it was probably someone trying to play a prank. They thought it was funny to mess around with others' lives, a rather dangerous idea. It didn't feel like a person since it never revealed its identity. Besides simply stating it was hungry, definitely it wouldn't be the case anymore. Regardless, whatever was stalking our property, we would find a way to stop it from happening again. Feeling violated and unsafe, the comfort of our home was ruined forever. No matter how long we lived there, we would relocate to a different state entirely, doing everything in our power to ensure our family remains safe and secure. I'm letting you know right now, I have no idea what the hell those things were, but they still show up in my nightmares sometimes. Anyway, that's my family's experience. I stand by it.